Imagine a man who refuses to be defined by the roles others try to assign to him. He is not bound by society's expectations or the desires of those around him. His only allegiance is to himself, and in doing so, he challenges the very essence of how power operates. Now, consider how that idea might unsettle you, not because it's wrong, but because it forces us to confront the limits of our own agency. Max Stirner was such a man, a philosopher who, in the mid-19th century, pushed the boundaries of individualism and self-realization to their limits. Stirner created a philosophical framework that questioned everything, from religion to morality, from societal norms to personal relationships. Stirner wasn't just interested in philosophical debates. He was a man who wanted to understand how personal power could be reclaimed from the institutions and ideologies that held sway over people's lives. But what makes Stirner especially relevant today? In our modern world, where the pressures of conformity, influence, and expectations are ubiquitous, Stirner's work invites us to ask tough questions about what it means to be free. Are we controlled by the roles we play? Are we manipulated by desires we don't fully understand? How do we reclaim our autonomy in an age that continually demands our submission to something greater than ourselves? These are the questions Stirner posed, questions that still resonate powerfully in today's society. This theme of personal power and control is not new. Throughout history, philosophers and thinkers have wrestled with the question of what it means to be truly free. In ancient times, Greek philosophers spoke of freedom in the context of virtue. Renaissance thinkers argued that individuality was key to human flourishing. Even in modern psychology, we continue to explore the balance between autonomy and the need for connection. But Stirner's perspective was radical. Others sought balance. Stirner declared that the greatest struggle was against the very forces that sought to control the self. In this exploration, we will dive deep into the psychological and philosophical implications of Stirner's philosophy. We'll explore how his ideas reverberate through history, how they align with contemporary psychological theory, and how they challenge our own perceptions of power, control, and self-awareness. Ultimately, we'll be asking, what happens when we stop letting others define us and instead begin to live as the uncontrollable force we were always meant to be? This is not merely an intellectual exercise. It's a journey toward reclaiming the power we too often surrender. Max Stirner, born Johann Caspar Schmidt in 1806, is a philosopher who found himself at odds with nearly every institution of his time: religion, government, family, and even the prevailing philosophical movements of his day. His landmark work, The Ego and Its Own, challenged the very foundations of Western thought, taking aim at the forces that shaped society, the state, morality, religion, and even the notion of human rights. Stirner's work is often described as a foundational text for individualism, anarchism, and existentialism. Yet, he remains a figure whose ideas continue to provoke deep and often controversial reflection. But what led to this radical challenge of society's structures? To understand Stirner's philosophy, it's important to place it within its historical and intellectual context. Stirner didn't invent the concept of individual autonomy. Rather, he was deeply embedded in a rich philosophical tradition. His ideas, while revolutionary, were a critique of the prevailing currents of thought during his time, currents that he believed were suffocating the individual spirit. Stirner was a product of two of the most influential intellectual movements in Western history, the Enlightenment and Romanticism. The Enlightenment, which began in the 17th century, is marked by a surge of rationalism, scientific inquiry, and an emphasis on human rights and individual freedoms. Thinkers like John Locke, Immanuel Kant, and Jean-Jacques Rousseau championed the rights of the individual and sought to break the shackles of monarchies, religious dogma, and oppressive institutions. It was a time of optimism about the power of reason and the potential for human progress. However, as Stirner looked around at the world of the early 19th century, he saw that the promise of the Enlightenment had been unfulfilled. While the Enlightenment had sought to empower the individual, Stirner argued that it had only replaced one form of authority with another. The belief in universal rights had simply given rise to new structures of control governments, social norms, and ideologies that continued to subjugate the individual to some greater collective entity. The Romantic movement, which emerged in response to the rationalism of the Enlightenment, focused on the importance of emotion, intuition, and personal experience. Romantic thinkers like Friedrich Schiller and Johann Wolfgang von Goethe argued for the value of individual expression and the sublime experience of the self. However, Stirner was critical of the Romantic ideals as well, seeing them as idealistic and insufficient. While Romanticism sought personal freedom through an alignment with nature and emotional experience, Stirner believed it was still dependent on external ideal something he saw as a form of self-subjugation. For him, true freedom could only be found in the rejection of all external authority, even the authority of reason or romanticized notions of the self. To fully grasp Stirner's critique, it's crucial to understand the intellectual environment of his time, particularly the influence of German idealism. Philosophers like G.W.F. Hegel were central to this movement, which sought to understand reality through the dialectical process, the idea that history unfolds in a series of conflicts and resolutions between opposing forces. Hegel's philosophy emphasized the development of self-consciousness through the dialectical relationship between the individual and society. However, Stirner rejected Hegel's notion of an evolving absolute spirit, which he saw as a metaphysical construct that negated the autonomy of the individual. For Stirner, Hegel's system represented just another form of collective thought that subjugated the individual to a greater force. Instead of aligning with Hegel's notion of history, Stirner proposed that the individual should reject all external systems of meaning, be they political, religious, or philosophical, and focus solely on the ego as the central point of existence. Stirner's central thesis in The Ego and Its Own is deceptively simple. The individual, the ego, must be freed from all external authority, including social norms, religious beliefs, and political systems. He introduced the idea of the union of egoists, which was not about forming any collective entity, but rather about individuals freely associating with one another without the expectation of submitting to an overarching moral or political order. The state, religion, and even the idea of humanity were seen as chains that bound the individual to external systems of control. What set Stirner apart from other radical thinkers of his time was his uncompromising approach to individualism. While many philosophers sought balance, Stirner sought total freedom for the individual, even if it meant rejecting all societal conventions. He argued that the individual's will should be the only guiding force in their life. Anything that stood in opposition to this self-determination was to be discarded. Stirner's ideas, while radical, did not exist in a vacuum. His critique of society and authority would influence later philosophical movements, particularly existentialism and anarchism. Friedrich Nietzsche, for example, shared Stirner's rejection of traditional morality and its emphasis on the will to power. However, while Nietzsche's work was concerned with the flourishing of the individual, Stirner's was more about the destruction of external forces that hindered personal autonomy. Stirner's rejection of moral systems and his focus on radical autonomy provided a framework for later thinkers who grappled with the problem of personal freedom. In the 20th century, Stirner's influence can be seen in existentialist philosophers like Jean-Paul Sartre and Albert Camus, who explored themes of individual autonomy, absurdity, and the search for meaning in a world devoid of external structures. Stirner's work also laid the groundwork for the development of anarchist thought, particularly in its critique of state power and the pursuit of absolute individual freedom. Despite this lasting impact, Stirner remained a somewhat marginal figure in philosophical circles for much of the 20th century. His ideas were often viewed as too extreme, too dismissive of human connection and communal life. However, in the 21st century, his work has seen a resurgence among thinkers interested in the intersections of individualism, autonomy, and power. K. In an age where the forces of social media, consumer culture, and political systems often seem to dictate our actions, Stirner's philosophy of radical self-determination speaks to our current moment of self-reclamation. Max Stirner's critique of control and his call for radical self-autonomy remain just as relevant today as they were in the 19th century. Whether in the face of societal norms, political institutions, or interpersonal relationships, the struggle for personal freedom and control over one's own life is ongoing. Stirner's work offers a powerful, albeit uncomfortable, invitation to ask ourselves, who or what controls me? And, perhaps more importantly, how can I reclaim my own power? In the next section, we'll explore the psychological and social dimensions of Stirner's philosophy, how the ideas of personal autonomy and control intersect with modern theories of psychology and social dynamics. What does it mean to be truly free in the psychological sense? And how can Stirner's ideas help us break free from the invisible chains that limit us in everyday life? Max Stirner's radical philosophy challenges the very foundations of our existence: society, religion, morality, and even the concept of identity itself. He rejected all forms of external control, urging individuals to embrace their true power as autonomous, self-determining beings. But while Stirner's philosophy may sound extreme, it has profound psychological and social implications that continue to resonate today. To understand these implications, we need to explore key psychological and social concepts related to personal autonomy, self-awareness, and the dynamics of control. In contemporary psychology, the concept of autonomy is central to our understanding of personal well-being. Autonomy refers to the ability to make one's own choices and act in accordance with one's values and desires, without undue external influence or coercion. It is one of the core components of psychological health. It's identified in self-determination theory developed by Deci and Ryan. According to SDT, autonomy is crucial for intrinsic motivation and a sense of personal fulfillment. Stirner's insistence on the ego's supremacy and rejection of external authorities aligns closely with this modern understanding of autonomy. For Stirner, the individual must act entirely on their own will, unencumbered by societal norms, family expectations, or moral obligations. He would argue that true autonomy is achieved not through conformity to external rules, but through the radical assertion of the self, through the rejection of all powers that attempt to define or control the individual. In psychological terms, this can be understood as an expression of the authentic self. When a person is free to act according to their own desires and values without fear of judgment, punishment, or even guilt, they experience what psychologists call self-congruence. This is the alignment between one's actions and their true sense of self, leading to a deep sense of inner peace and psychological coherence. Conversely, when people feel controlled, whether by society, relationships, or internalized norms, they experience inner conflict and dissonance, which can lead to feelings of anxiety, depression, and powerlessness. Thus, Stirner's focus on the rejection of external authority reflects a psychological truth. Individuals are most fulfilled and most powerful when they can act in alignment with their authentic desires, free from the influence of external forces. While Stirner's philosophy emphasizes personal autonomy, it also raises an important question about the dynamics of power and control. In modern society, it is easy to overlook the subtle and pervasive ways in which control operates, whether in families, workplaces, or broader social structures. Power dynamics shape our behavior, self-concept, and our relationships. Psychological theories of social influence, such as those developed by psychologists like Stanley Milgram and Philip Zimbardo, show just how easily individuals can be manipulated into following authority figures, even when it goes against their own values. The Milgram experiments, for example, demonstrated that people are often willing to harm others simply because an authority figure tells them to do so. Similarly, Zimbardo's Stanford prison experiment showed how individuals could quickly adapt to roles of dominance or submission in a structured environment. These studies revealed the extent to which human beings are susceptible to the influence of external forces, even when those forces demand behavior that contradicts personal ethics. In this light, Stirner's call for a complete rejection of all authority becomes a stark critique of the ways in which society manipulates individuals into conformity. According to Stirner, the state, religion, moral systems are not neutral. They are mechanisms of control that seek to stifle the individual's will in favor of a collective order. The result is a society of people who are, to varying degrees, emotionally and psychologically enslaved by the expectations placed upon them by others. In modern psychological theory, particularly in the work of Carl Jung and the theory of the false self proposed by Donald Winnicott, there is a deep recognition of the psychological harm caused by the failure to live authentically. According to Winnicott, the false self is a persona that people create to meet the expectations of others, often at the expense of their own true desires and emotions. This false self becomes a protective shield, but over time, it can lead to feelings of emptiness and disconnection from one's true essence. Stirner's concept of the ego is directly relevant here. For Stirner, the ego is not a false or corrupt part of the self. It is the true self, the autonomous center of consciousness. In contrast to the false self of psychological theory, which is shaped by social expectations, Stirner's ego is an entirely self-assertive force, one that does not bow to the demands of others or seek approval from outside forces. However, this self-assertion requires a deep psychological commitment. It requires the courage to abandon the false selves that we have created over the years to fit into family, social, and professional roles. The psychological challenge is thus twofold. First, to recognize the false selves we have adopted, and second, to embrace the ego in its raw, unfiltered form, rejecting all constraints placed upon it by the outside world. To understand Stirner's radical approach to personal autonomy, we can also turn to Carl Jung's concept of individuation. Jung believed that the path to psychological wholeness is through the process of individuation, the journey by which a person integrates the various aspects of their personality, including those they may have previously repressed or denied. This process is not easy, as it often involves confronting the shadow, the parts of the self that are hidden or disowned due to social expectations or internalized norms. In many ways, Stirner's philosophy mirrors the process of individuation. The ego, for Stirner, represents the true self that must be liberated from the constraints of societal expectations. And this is akin to the Jungian hero's journey and archetypal story of the self's struggle to break free from external forces and reclaim its authenticity. Stirner's work can be seen as an invitation to embark on this journey of self-realization, rejecting the false selves imposed by society and finding the courage to live as an unbounded individual. This archetype of the hero is significant in both psychological and philosophical terms. The hero's journey is not just a physical quest, it is a psychological one, where the individual confronts and overcomes the forces that seek to control or limit their freedom. Whether in mythology or in Stirner's philosophy, the hero is always on a path toward self-mastery and liberation. Stirner's radical individualism can be unsettling because it challenges not only the external control mechanisms of society, but also our deeply ingrained need for connection and belonging. Human beings are social creatures, and our relationships with others are a critical part of our identity. While Stirner acknowledges the importance of personal autonomy, he also recognizes that humans cannot exist in isolation. The concept of the union of egoista, voluntary, non-hierarchical association of individuals suggests that personal autonomy does not require a rejection of all social relationships. Instead, it calls for relationships that are based on mutual respect for each person's individuality, rather than subjugation to a common goal or system. In today's world, where social media platforms often promote the idea of self-expression, while simultaneously pushing people into predefined categories and norms, Stirner's philosophy offers a powerful counterpoint. The need to belong, to fit in, is strong, yet it can lead to a loss of self. Stirner offers us a vision of a society where individuals are not defined by collective norms, but by their own will, where connection is based on authentic interactions rather than the pressure to conform. Stirner's radical philosophy offers a deep and sometimes uncomfortable reflection on the ways in which we are controlled by external authorities, by societal expectations, and even by our own internalized norms. Modern psychology supports many of Stirner's insights about the importance of autonomy, authenticity, and self-determination for psychological well-being. However, it also highlights the challenges of living authentically in a world that constantly demands our compliance. Stirner's work provides a blueprint for personal liberation, but it also requires deep introspection and the courage to break free from the invisible chains that bind us. By examining these psychological concepts, autonomy, the false self, social influence, in the hero's journey, we can begin to understand how Stirner's philosophy offers not just a critique of society, but a pathway to true self-realization. In the next section, we will explore the emotional, personal, and social consequences of neglecting personal autonomy, examining how Stirner's philosophy can help us reclaim our power in the modern world. Max Stirner's radical philosophy challenges us to reject the external forces that seek to shape and control our lives. He encourages us to embrace autonomy, to be the masters of our own existence, and to live without submission to any greater power. While his vision of individual freedom can be liberating, it also forces us to confront the consequences of a world in which personal autonomy is neglected or compromised. In this section, we will explore the emotional, personal, and social consequences of failing to reclaim our power and autonomy, drawing parallels between Stirner's ideas and real-world implications. One of the most profound emotional consequences of neglecting personal autonomy is the internal conflict that arises from living a life that is not in alignment with our true selves. In psychological terms, it's often referred to as cognitive dissonance, the uncomfortable tension that occurs when our actions conflict with our beliefs, values, or desires. For many, this dissonance arises when they submit to societal expectations, internalized norms, or other external pressures, even when these do not resonate with their authentic self. Stirner would argue that this conflict is not just a personal struggle, it is a form of self-betrayal. By allowing external forces, whether they are societal roles, family expectations, or moral ideals, to dictate how we live, we sacrifice our true autonomy. This can lead to a deep sense of alienation from ourselves, as we increasingly live in a way that is disconnected from our inner desires and motivations. Take, for example, the common experience of living up to the expectations of others. Whether it's a career path chosen for financial stability rather than personal passion, or conforming to a relationship dynamic that feels restrictive. Over time, these compromises can create a chasm between the person we are and the person we present to the world. The result is often a pervasive sense of emptiness, as though we are not fully alive, merely going through the motions of existence. This emotional turmoil is reflected in modern psychological phenomena such as burnout, depression, and anxiety. Studies have shown that individuals who experience a lack of control over their lives, who feel powerless to shape their own futures, are more likely to experience negative mental health outcomes. Stirner's philosophy, while extreme, offers an antidote to this malaise by urging us to take control of our own destiny, to reject the societal norms that attempt to define us, and to live as self-determined individuals. The failure to reclaim personal autonomy also has profound personal consequences, particularly when it comes to identity formation. Identity is not something that is fixed. It is an ongoing process of self-discovery and self-definition. When we allow external forces, or the family, culture, or the media to dictate who we are, we risk losing touch with our true identity. This can manifest as a sense of confusion or disorientation, as individuals struggle to reconcile who they are with the roles they are expected to play. Stirner's philosophy speaks directly to this crisis of identity. He argues that the individual must be free from the control of societal norms, religious doctrines, and ideological systems in order to create an authentic sense of self. Without this freedom, we become mere shadows of ourselves, caught in the machinery of societal expectations. This is evident in the way many people experience their careers, relationships, and even their social roles. How many individuals feel trapped in careers that don't align with their passions or personal values? How many feel suffocated by familial expectations or the pressure to adhere to a particular social identity? The stagnation that results from living inauthentically can lead to feelings of frustration, resentment, and ultimately a sense of powerlessness. From a psychological standpoint, this stagnation can be viewed as a failure to achieve what psychologists call self-actualization, the process of realizing one's full potential. According to Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs, self-actualization represents the pinnacle of human development, where a person achieves a deep sense of fulfillment and purpose. However, this level of personal growth is impossible when we are constrained by external forces that prevent us from truly knowing ourselves and pursuing our deepest desires. Stirner's philosophy also has far-reaching social implications. In a society that values conformity over individuality, the neglect of personal autonomy leads to a breakdown in genuine human connection. While humans are social creatures and we thrive on relationships, those relationships can become hollow and disempowering when we fail to assert our own boundaries and desires. In modern society, we are constantly bombarded by societal messages telling us how to look, how to behave, and what to value. Social media, advertising, and even educational systems often reinforce the idea that our worth is defined by our appearance, our success, or our adherence to social norms. This can create an environment where people are more concerned with fitting in than with being true to themselves. The social consequences of this are profound. When we prioritize conformity over authenticity, we risk losing meaningful connections with others. Relationships based on shared ideals or mutual respect for individuality are often replaced by relationships based on status, power dynamics, or a superficial sense of belonging. People may remain in toxic relationships or group dynamics simply because they are afraid of being ostracized or rejected. Stirner's vision of a society where individuals form unions of egoists is freely associating with others based on mutual self-interest and respect offers a powerful counterpoint to this culture of conformity. In Stirner's world, relationships are not defined by societal expectations, but by the free will of individuals who come together out of mutual respect and desire, not coercion or necessity. This would create a society where people are free to express their true selves without fear of judgment, leading to more authentic connections. However, the societal pressures to conform are not easily overcome. The fear of being judged, ridiculed, or excluded is deeply ingrained in most people's psyche, and it can be incredibly difficult to break free from these norms. Stirner's radical individualism thus presents both an opportunity and a challenge. The opportunity to live as our true selves, but also the challenge of confronting the social forces that seek to shape us into something we are not. Throughout history, there are numerous examples of individuals or movements that have struggled against societal norms and expectations in the name of personal freedom. Consider the stories of revolutionary figures like Socrates, who was sentenced to death for his beliefs, or the suffragettes, who fought for women's right to vote in the face of immense social opposition. These individuals did not merely suffer personal consequences. They experienced the full brunt of societal forces attempting to suppress their autonomy and punish their refusal to conform. These historical figures embody the essence of Stirner's philosophy, the rejection of external authority in favor of personal truth. While their struggles often led to suffering, They also left a legacy of empowerment and inspiration for their willingness to embrace their own autonomy in the face of overwhelming odds. Serves as a powerful reminder of what is possible when we refuse to be controlled. Moreover, these figures reflect the deeper psychological truth behind Stirner's work. True freedom often comes at a cost. Personal autonomy is not easily won. It requires courage, resilience, and a willingness to face the consequences of standing apart from the crowd. This is the essence of the hero's journey, a journey that requires individuals to face trials, overcome obstacles, and ultimately emerge transformed. Max Stirner's radical philosophy calls us to liberate ourselves from all forms of control, to live as free individuals, and to assert our autonomy against the forces that seek to define us. This path to freedom, however, is not without its challenges. While Stirner's ideas offer a theoretical framework for radical self-determination, they also leave us with a practical question. How can we implement these ideas in our daily lives? How do we begin the work of reclaiming our autonomy, dismantling the false selves we've created, and living authentically? In this section, we will explore a variety of psychological tools, habits, and mindset shifts that can help us embrace the freedom Stirner envisioned. We'll draw on modern psychological practices such as cognitive behavioral therapy and mindfulness, as well as traditional wisdom from Stoicism, Sufi teachings, and other schools of thought to offer a comprehensive approach to personal autonomy. The goal is not perfection, but steady growth, commitment to living more freely and authentically, one step at a time. Before we can reclaim our personal autonomy, we must first become aware of the ways in which we are controlled, both by external forces and by our own internalized beliefs. Stirner's philosophy demands that we confront the systems of power that shape our lives, but it also asks us to look inward and examine the self-concept we've constructed. The first practical step is cultivating deep self-awareness, mindfulness, and reflection. One of the most powerful tools for self-awareness is mindfulness. Mindfulness allows us to observe our thoughts, emotions, and behaviors without judgment, creating space between stimulus and response. This practice can help us identify moments when we are acting out of habit, societal conditioning, or fear of judgment, rather than from our true desires. To incorporate mindfulness into your life, start with simple daily practices. Spend a few minutes each morning or evening in quiet reflection. Ask yourself, where am I living out of expectation, and where am I living according to my own desires? These moments of introspection can reveal patterns of behavior that limit your autonomy and help you identify areas where you may be surrendering your personal power. Journaling. Journaling is another valuable practice that can help deepen self-awareness. By writing about your experiences, thoughts, and emotions, you create a space to untangle the complexities of your inner world. Key journal prompt, inspired by Stirner's philosophy, is: in what ways am I living according to the will of others? And in what ways am I asserting my true desires? As Stirner argued, much of the control we experience comes from the internalization of societal norms, familial expectations, and cultural conditioning. These influences form the false self, a persona we create to gain acceptance and approval, but which often prevents us from living authentically. To reclaim autonomy, we must dismantle this false self and embrace the true self that lies beneath. Cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, is a highly effective psychological tool for identifying and challenging negative thought patterns, many of which are rooted in the societal norms we internalize. One of the key techniques in CBT is cognitive restructuring, which involves questioning the validity of our thoughts and beliefs. For example, if you find yourself constantly seeking approval from others, ask yourself, why do I need external validation? What is the underlying belief that drives this need? Once you identify this belief, you can begin to challenge it. Does it hold true? Is this something you truly want to continue believing? Or can you replace it with a more empowering thought? Reframing expectations. Another way to break free from the false self is to reframe the expectations we place on ourselves. Reflect on the roles you play in your life, whether as a parent, partner, professional, or a friend. In each of these roles, are you acting out of a sense of duty or expectation, or are you acting in alignment with your personal values and desires? Begin to ask yourself, what does it mean to live authentically in each of these roles? The more you can align your actions with your true self, the more liberated you will feel. Stirner's philosophy is about rejecting all external systems of control, but this doesn't mean we live in isolation. It means we form relationships based on mutual respect and self-interest, rather than out of a need to conform or please others. To live authentically, we must learn to set clear boundaries with others' boundaries that protect our personal space, energy, and autonomy. The practice of saying no. One of the simplest yet most powerful ways to assert autonomy is by learning to say no. In a world that constantly demands more of our time, energy, and attention, saying no is an act of self-preservation. It is a declaration that your time and energy are valuable and that you will not allow others to take them for granted. Begin by practicing saying no in small, low-stakes situations. For example, if a friend invites you to an event you don't want to attend, simply say, "I appreciate the invitation, but I'm going to pass on this one." Scott. The more you practice saying no, the more comfortable you will become with setting boundaries that protect your autonomy. Creating emotional boundaries. Setting emotional boundaries is equally important. Many of us feel the pressure to take on the emotions and problems of others, especially in close relationships. While it's important to be supportive, it's equally crucial to protect your emotional well-being. If you find yourself constantly absorbing the emotions of those around you, take a step back and ask, am I taking responsibility for emotions that aren't mine? Practice emotional detachment by reminding yourself that others' feelings are theirs to manage, not yours. Stirner's philosophy is, at its core, about the full expression of the self. To live authentically, we must embrace the freedom to express ourselves fully through our words, actions, and creativity. True self-expression is one of the most empowering ways to reclaim our autonomy, and it can take many forms. Creative expression, whether through art, writing, music, or movement. Creative expression allows us to channel our inner world into something tangible. Stirner would argue that the act of creation is a form of self-assertion. It is a declaration of who we are and what we stand for. Engaging in creative practices can be an act of reclaiming our power, breaking free from the constraints that society places on us. Authentic communication. In our relationships, we often hold back parts of ourselves to avoid conflict or rejection. But Stirner's call to autonomy requires that we speak our truth, even when it's uncomfortable. Start by practicing authentic communication. Speak openly about your desires, boundaries, and emotions, even in situations where you might typically hold back. Authentic communication is not about being harsh or unkind, but about being true to yourself in your interactions with others. Living authentically in a world that pressures us to conform requires inner strength and resilience. Stirner's philosophy is not just about rejecting external control. It is about cultivating the inner strength to live in alignment with your true self, even in the face of external opposition. Stoic practices. Stoicism, an ancient philosophy that emphasizes resilience and self-mastery, offers valuable tools for cultivating inner strength. The Stoics taught that we cannot control external events, but we can control how we respond to them. One of their key practices was the idea of amor fati, which involves embracing whatever comes your way, even hardship, as an opportunity for growth. When faced with challenges or external pressure to conform, remind yourself of the Stoic principle that you cannot control others' actions, but you can control your own. Reflect on the aspects of your life where you feel the most pressure to conform, and ask, how can I respond with inner strength regardless of the external circumstances? Meditation. Meditation is another powerful tool for cultivating resilience. By practicing mindfulness meditation, you can develop the mental clarity and emotional stability needed to navigate the challenges of living authentically. Meditation also helps to quiet the noise of external influences, allowing you to connect with your inner self and reaffirm your commitment to autonomy. In exploring the philosophy of Max Stirner, we have undertaken a journey into the very heart of what it means to live authentically. Stirner's challenge is simple, yet profound: to reject all external forces, whether societal norms, seeming expectations, or religious dogma, seek to define and control us. To embrace the self, the ego, as the only true authority, and to live freely, unbound by any force greater than our own will. His radical call to freedom resonates through history, psychology, and social dynamics, offering not just a philosophical framework, but a practical guide for reclaiming our personal power. However, Stirner's philosophy is not without its complexities. To live as Stirner envisioned requires us to confront deep questions about power, identity, and belonging. It requires an unwavering commitment to autonomy. It's challenging the invisible forces that have shaped our lives and to shedding the false selves we have constructed to fit in. And yet, it also offers an invitation to explore freedom in its most pure form, the freedom to choose our own path, to define ourselves on our terms, and to act in accordance with our deepest desires. But why, in today's world, does Stirner's philosophy still matter? Why is his call for personal autonomy, his challenge to control, more relevant now than ever? In our modern world, we face a constant tension between individuality and conformity. On the one hand, we are constantly told to be ourselves and follow our passions. On the other, we live in a society that bombards us with external expectations, from the pressures of social media to the demands of work and family. The quest for self-determination often feels at odds with the forces that demand our compliance. Stirner's critique of authority is particularly powerful because it forces us to confront how deeply ingrained these forces are in our daily lives. The state, religion, and even the expectations of our loved ones, all these systems seek to control and limit our potential. But Stirner's radical individualism does not call for rebellion for the sake of rebellion. Rather, it urges us to ask, what is it that I truly want? What would my life look like if I were to live not as a reflection of the roles assigned to me, but as an expression of my authentic self? The answer is not easy. It requires constant self-reflection, courage, and a willingness to question everything we've been taught about what it means to fit in or succeed, But in a world where so many of us are disconnected from our true selves, where conformity and the pressures to belong are omnipresent, Stirner's call to liberation can be both empowering and profoundly unsettling. The journey toward personal autonomy that Stirner outlines is not a solitary one. It is deeply connected to our relationships, our communities, and our interactions with others. While his philosophy emphasizes the importance of individualism, it also speaks to the need for meaningful connections that are based on mutual respect and voluntary association, not coercion or obligation. In practical terms, living in alignment with Stirner's philosophy means taking control of the narrative of our own lives. It means questioning the roles we play and asking whether they are genuinely in service of our true desires. It means learning to say no when we are asked to submit to others' will, setting boundaries that protect our autonomy and emotional well-being, and embracing the courage to express our true selves without fear of judgment. The practices we've discussed, mindfulness, journaling, setting boundaries, key, and engaging in creative expression are tools that help us step into this freedom. But ultimately, the journey toward autonomy is about breaking free from the systems of control that limit us. It's about recognizing that the only authority in our lives should be the one we place upon ourselves. As we wrap up this exploration of Stirner's philosophy, I leave you with a simple but powerful question. What would your life look like if you stopped letting others define you? What if you could shed the roles, expectations, and societal pressures that have shaped your identity and instead live as a fully autonomous being, free to choose your path without compromise. The road to personal freedom is not easy. It requires ongoing reflection, self-discipline, and, above all, a willingness to confront the forces that seek to control us. But it is a journey that, once embarked upon, leads to a deeper sense of self-empowerment and fulfillment. By embracing Stirner's challenge, we reclaim our power not as a rejection of others, but as a profound act of self-respect and self-expression. The journey toward personal autonomy is not one that has a clear endpoint, but rather a continuous unfolding of the self. It is a commitment to questioning, to growing, and to always striving to live as our truest selves. As we move forward, may we find the courage to live freely, to assert our desires, and to create lives that are not defined by external forces, but by our own unique vision and will. Reclaim your power, embrace autonomy, and live authentically. As we conclude our deep dive into Max Stirner's philosophy, I want to leave you with an empowering invitation. The journey to reclaim your personal autonomy is not just an intellectual exercise. It's a deeply transformative process that begins today with you. Stirner's radical call for self-determination challenges us to question everything we've been told about who we are and what we should want. It invites us to embrace the possibility of living authentically, without the need to conform to societal expectations or outside pressures. But here's the thing. The path to autonomy is not an easy one. It requires us to confront the forces that have shaped us, family expectations, social norms, career pressures, and make the conscious decision to step into our power unapologetically. This journey is about questioning the roles we've been assigned and asking, do these align with my true desires? It's about shedding the false self and embracing the courage to live as the uncontainable force we were always meant to be. This is not just a philosophy, it's a practice. By incorporating simple tools like mindfulness, journaling, and boundary setting into your life, you can begin to break free from the invisible chains that limit you. You'll start to notice moments where you have the opportunity to assert your autonomy and make decisions based on what truly resonates with your inner self, not based on what others expect of you. I invite you to take this journey with us. Subscribe to this channel and join a community of like-minded individuals who are dedicated to growing, evolving, and reclaiming their personal power. This is a space where we dive into the deep, real questions about identity, self-awareness, and the pursuit of a meaningful life without superficial content or easy answers. We are here for the long journey, where each step towards self-mastery and radical authenticity counts. If you're ready to challenge the status quo, to stop letting others define you, and to begin living with purpose, this is the place for you. Together, we will explore more tools, more insights, and more practices to help you live a life that is aligned with your true will. Subscribe now, and let's continue this journey towards self-liberation and empowerment. Are you ready to take the first step toward living as the uncontrollable force you are always meant to be? Join us now, and let's make it happen.